Welcome to Hope Blooms, a podcast from the Early Pregnancy Loss Association.
At EPLA, we seek to support women and families suffering early pregnancy loss by providing resources, education, and community. It is our vision that no one suffers miscarriage alone. Welcome back to Hope Blooms. I'm Emily Carrington, EPLA's Executive Director.
And I'm Stephanie Gordon, an EPLA board member.
Today, we are going to talk about this idea that we actually had on our blog a while ago, last year. Moving forward doesn't have to mean moving on. And I think this is timely. It's still the beginning of the year. We're about a month into the year. There was, I think, this interesting idea of leaving the past behind, especially as you come to a new year. But sometimes I think that can be really hard for bereaved mothers. In some ways, you're leaving a lot of sadness behind, but in other ways, you're also leaving the life of your baby behind. So I think as we start the year, it's important to realize moving forward doesn't have to mean moving on. Yeah, I think this goes a couple ways, right? Like, we like to forget sadness. We like to leave sadness behind, live our best life now.
And also not allow, accepting grieving periods.
Mm-hmm.
I think back to my miscarriage, and when I reached 1 month post miscarriage, I was like, okay, I made it 1 month. Like, I should be feeling better. Mm-hmm. But I feel like for me, it was a whole year of accepting.
Oh, yeah.
A solid 12 months of not, quote, moving on. So I agree with you that this is something very common.
Well, and I think too, there's not an arbitrary, I think there's something good to rhythms and seasons and looking forward and newness and freshness that the new year can bring. But there's also not necessarily some magical, wiping the slate clean. With my second miscarriage, I was due in the spring of the following year. So I carried all of that grief into the new year with me.
Yes.
And so there wasn't
that feeling.
Just get up and move on, right? You're talking about that first year, and there are so many awful things you have to get through. It's not just you get through the first month and the hormonal imbalances, and you get through, sort of your first cycle after miscarriage, and then you have due dates.
Yeah.
And then you have birthdays, and then you have all of these things that sort of stare you down that you can't just sort of wipe the slate clean.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we have to be sensitive to that, especially that first winter, like my hormones, my grief, my anticipation, and then winter.
Yep. Winter here, especially in Michigan.
We live in Michigan. And it was my first winter back in the Midwest. I had been in Texas. There's sunshine in Texas. There's warmth in Texas. Winter lasts 6 minutes. You get one good snowstorm, or not even snowstorm, one good icing, and everyone freaks out for about 18 hours. And then winter's over. I never really understood why spring clothes, real spring clothes, were for Easter until I lived in Texas, right? I think, but I also think that this is a good period, when done well, of reflecting, moving forward. And maybe we're playing with some semantics here, moving on versus moving forward. But I think moving on suggests something like
forgetting. To me, that's the word that comes to mind.
Putting it behind you,
mm-hmm.
distancing yourself, moving on from that, like a bad boyfriend.
Every year we honor the baby that we lost. So I think there's some tradition, I guess you could call it. So you're not, I do like moving forward.
Yes.
Because it's easy to say move on, but then to me that feels like you're forgetting whatever that was.
Leaving them behind.
Which is what, I would say almost every mother who's experienced miscarriage doesn't do
Right.
So like honoring that, first, like that due date that approaches, and then, honoring that birthday and like bringing that child along, like with my 3 children, I've talked to them about this baby and we, celebrate their birthday and,
they're a part of your life and they still shape, they shape the shape of your family. I was thinking about this the other day that, I have 2 beautiful, vibrant children. But our 3 losses, like they still exist with that. I only have 2 children. Like that's never going to, well, I mean, maybe I'll have more, but like, well, that could change, but they won't be replaced. We won't be, our family looks the way it looks because of this. Right. And I have the children I have and it shapes. But I also think with moving forward, so it's not hopeless though. So there's this moving forward and like we're sitting here today doing this and talking about our losses. And I think that's an act of moving forward. We're not sitting in the same grief cycles from a decade ago. Right. So I'm not, I still read and pray and journal, but I've also incorporated the losses into an active part of my life. And that's a moving forward that is good.
Yes.
And is productive.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean it has to only look like this or that you even, I also, sometimes I feel guilty that I haven't incorporated my children enough into my life. And then I remember like, oh, I run a nonprofit like in their honor. Yes. But it doesn't always feel conscious every day. It's not as ceremonial or as I thought it would be, where I wake up every morning and say, this is for you.
Yeah.
But just as with the rest of my family, I don't wake up every morning and say, this is for my children. Right? But every act I do is, even when it's not, sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes the, labors of motherhood and love are really clear. And sometimes it's just doing life.
Yes.
But
I understand that.
All centers around them.
And I think the phrase moving forward would be helpful to any mom who's experiencing loss right now, because in that moment, even the phrase moving forward seems impossible. But as moms who have experienced miscarriage over a decade ago, it is possible.
Yeah.
And then just to allow yourself some time. It's not quick or easy, but it does happen. And it's usually a very beautiful path.
Yeah. I'm looking back at this blog post I wrote last year, and I think it's complicated too. We've talked a lot about the mom, like not wanting to like leave your child behind. But I also wrote, I like rereading what old me said.
Don't you love that?
Sometimes I have thoughts. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they're not. But some women might be ready to move on, move forward, and get out of their grief. This is the way I felt. 2014 was a year of hell. Between February and October, I conceived and lost 2 babies, and 2015 was a welcome relief. I was tired to death, and I needed something different. I was not mad to say goodbye to 2014. But 2014 was also a year of life. Those babies lived inside of me, even if it was only for a few short weeks. That is something I should have done better to honor, both for myself and for my babies. And I sort of come to say what I've just said, that is sometimes I feel like I haven't done enough, but I realize that in the end, I've never forgotten. So I think it's if you're like ready to get the heck out of 2023, I understand. I've had plenty of years like that. And sometimes that's an act of hope of like, all right, let's leave that behind. But I think it's a good, I think winter allows for this in the slow down, quiet, melancholy gray. If you're somewhere where it's sunny, we envy you.
Yes, we do.
If you're not, make another cup of tea and reflect. If you're somewhere where it's sunny, reflect into the beautiful sunshine. But I think it's important, and moving forward allows for this, right? It was awful. There's something to move forward from, but it was also life. You don't have to move on. You don't have to get rid of it.
Right.
Let there be, was there some joy? Was it, even if it feels erased, even if it feels like it was all gone, but that the pregnancy test or the ultrasound.
Yes.
Or telling your partner or telling
Gives
your
me,
parents.
like, butterflies thinking about that.
And that was all real. And in the moment, unadulterated. It's not erased by, like, those were real moments of joy in life. It's okay to carry those forward with us.
So how long did it take you to want to, like, after you accepted everything and maybe were grieving, how long did it take you to take that first step of moving forward, do you feel?
It's such a great question. I would say actually between both, there were sort of these like stark. So I miscarried end of April, early May, and then again September, October. And sort of in the between, I had this like hope, obviously, of like, okay, we're going to try again. And that was an act of moving on. Oh, there's so many like, okay, what's moving forward, right? So do you mean like getting out of bed and being a normal human? That was, not that long, a few weeks to a couple months and different situation, and not carrying around like, the weight got lighter and easier. Being ready to have another child, that's still a messy.
Yeah.
And the first time I was like, okay, well, that was a fluke. Let's go for it. And then after the second one, I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to keep doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I had one miscarriage, but I like that fear of what if it took me a solid year. I think it was a year.
Yeah. There was a year. I'm trying to think. My first two happened sort of back to back, and that was an act of hope. Then my third one was a year later, and that was a really early miscarriage. And I can't say that was like a super intentional. It was more of a like the best I could do was sort of like not try to get pregnant, but not. It was sort of like the best I could do. I couldn't muster wanting a pregnancy. It was almost another year before we conceived my oldest. And there was a lot of like messy, like, so moving on in that way. And I would say even now, 10 years later, it haunted both my live births. It was better with my second, but not great. I mean, with my oldest, on this subject of moving on and moving forward, the morning she was born, a few stories on this. Less than a month before she was born, and I had never made it past 12 weeks of pregnancy. So it got easier when I could feel movements. It got easier when I had ultrasounds. But I had 3 pregnancies that just ended in sadness. I literally had no real concept. Obviously, I know how babies are made and how they get here and how pregnancy works. But I had no realization that like this was going to end in a live birth. And I didn't have any like traumatic visualization of what else was going to happen. I didn't picture her dying. I just couldn't picture her being born. So I remember about a month before she was due, everyone was so excited. And I went through all of the steps, and we had the baby showers, and they were good, and they were healing, and I needed them. But I was still dragging my feet. And about a month before she was due, someone said, "Oh, do you have the nursery all done? Is it beautiful?" And I was like, "No, I can't." And I mean, like, I was a housewife with no children. I had all the time in the world to tend to this nursery. But somewhere deep inside of me, I couldn't make it real yet. And so one of my best friends from childhood came up and like made me wash all the baby clothes and at least put the baby clothes away.
Oh, Emily.
So like we got that far. And it wasn't like I was like laying on the floor crying either. It was just like, that's not something that needs done. And then the day and we did everything. We walked through all the steps. We took our classes. Like I had a birth plan.
The birth plan.
That's a whole different podcast. But anyway, and then the morning I had been in labor for 14 hours. And we get to the doctor, we get to the hospital, and the nurse says to me, we're going to have a baby today. And my whole body was like, we are? Like, what else are we doing here? I could feel her. I knew she was safe. I knew we'd just listened to her heartbeat. Everything, my entire consciousness knew that that's what was happening. But pregnancy never ended in babies. So to have like this baby is coming. So how long did it in some ways forever, and to like really move on and to really not be affected by it. And with my second, that was not as bad. It was like we went to the hospital and I was like, I will be bringing home a baby.
Yeah.
Like, I can't say that child never got a nursery, but that's totally different. Second child, she had lovely, safe places to sleep, but it was not the same. But yeah, I could only do the step I was on.
I understand that. Even all 3 of my pregnancies after my first pregnancy, which ended in miscarriage, I spotted with each pregnancy. And so that trigger of, okay, and then, making it to 12 weeks and then 20 weeks. And then you're like, ooh, now we're 25 weeks. If something were to happen, it would hopefully be okay. I mean, right.
Well, yeah, you start getting to that
the box
wanting, you get past that point of viability.
Yes.
And you're like, okay. and that's awful. And NICU stays are awful. But when you've lost him in that first trimester and it's so helpless and it's so faceless, you get to this point of like, okay, I'm 36 weeks. They won't be preterm.
Right.
And it just sort of follows you.
It does follow you.
I don't know that another pregnancy wouldn't sort of be haunted by it. I think the difference now is that in my old age, if I were to have a geriatric pregnancy,
same.
I've had enough life that I know another miscarriage is survivable.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair to say.
That it is awful, but I also know it's a grief I can endure. So yeah, I think that's moving forward, not moving on.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away.
It never will go away.
No.
But it is possible to move forward, even when it feels impossible.
And I think that's okay. And I think if you're feel like you're moving forward maybe too fast, or if you feel like, am I not feeling enough grief? I don't think there's a wrong way.
Right. It's going to be different for every mother.
Yeah. I think it's something that it's, in the same way that I've sort of been either hard on myself or think like, oh, have I done enough? Like, they stay with us in ways we don't know, and to just sort of trust that. So we want to encourage you in this new year to take some time for yourself and for your little one. Maybe think about ways to move forward without moving on, ways to remember them, and ways to tend to your grief. So thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of Hope Blooms. Thank you for listening to Hope Blooms, a podcast from the Early Pregnancy Loss Association.
To learn more about how we and you can support women suffering early pregnancy loss, visit our website at miscarriagecare.com or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you for listening.